Hi everyone, welcome to the Aiding Therapy Services YouTube channel. My name is Emily and I am the owner and main therapist at Aiding Therapy Services located in Broomfield, Colorado. I'm coming to you from my office today just to make it a little bit more chill, and wanted to talk to you a little bit today about the different licenses that you might encounter when seeking a therapist. I do have a few caveats with that, in that license requirements are going to be different from state to state. Now, I'll use the example of I have two licenses here in the state of Colorado, my licensed professional counselor license and my licensed marriage family therapy license. Now, I won't go into too much of the nitty-gritty of what those requirements are here in the state of Colorado, but I will say that, like, let's say if I were to move to Florida, I have to take an additional addictions course, domestic violence course, and I think an HIV AIDS education course. There might be other courses that I would have to take in order to be able to transfer my license from Colorado to Florida, but it would be the same if I were to move to New Jersey or possibly Texas or Illinois, wherever. So if you are indeed curious as to what the license requirements are in your state, I definitely encourage you to Google your state's regulatory board and licensing board, and you can find out those requirements there. For right now, I just wanted to help everyone gain a little bit of familiarity with what some of the more common licenses are, what the differences are between them, and ultimately, does it matter in terms of your own relationship with the therapist. Now, to start, we're going to go over I'm going to go ahead and explain each license, but you'll see the graphic come up over my face here in a little bit. Now, the first license I want to make a little bit of distinction between it and all the other licenses is the Psychiatrist Licensure along with the Psychologist Licensure. So the psychiatrist has an MD. They are a medical doctor, so they have gone through medical school, done their residency, their different rotations. And I believe, I'm not 100% sure, so I'll have to double check this, and if I'm able to gain this information before this video goes up, I'll be happy to include it. I believe they have to do an additional rotation on a psychiatric ward, as well as the normal rotations that a doctor does. This means a psychiatrist can prescribe medication. Now, just like any doctor that you see, or any therapist that you see for that matter, they may have their specialties. Like they might have a specialty in child and adolescent psychiatry. They also may have a specialty in adult psychiatry, and so on and so forth. So that's the biggest thing to know. The psychiatrists that I have encountered in the past typically focus primarily on the medication portion of mental health. That's not to say they may not use some therapeutic skills and suggest other interventions, but their main purpose is medication. Right? Now, a psychologist also can be referred to as doctor because they do have a doctorate degree, either a PhD or what's called a PsyD, P-S-Y-D. If a psychologist has a PhD, that indicates that they did some sort of research thesis in their doctoral program. Back in my previous job, whenever I saw a psychologist that had a PhD behind their name, I'd often ask them what their research was, and I always found it fascinating to hear what things interested them and how their research went. But that's a tangential aside. So basically they get a little bit more schooling than the rest of us master's levels clinicians. They are also, in terms of their lens and their perspective, they tend to be a little bit closer to the medical realm in terms of how they view things, and also look at a lot of research, which all therapists should be looking at what the latest research is in terms of various mental health issues and whatnot, but psychologists definitely are geared toward that, in part due to their training. They're also the only license, aside from psychiatrists and pediatricians and whatnot, that can administer the assessments necessary to diagnose autism spectrum disorder. So even though I may encounter a child and I may suspect that child has autism spectrum disorder, I cannot administer the assessments necessary to confirm that diagnosis. At that point, I would have to refer out, and I have had conversations with parents around where they can potentially seek to get that diagnosis, or at least the testing necessary for that diagnosis. So that's the main differences between those two. Now, in my next slide, I have three licensures: the licensed professional counselor, the licensed marriage family therapist, and the licensed clinical social worker. I'll start with the licensed marriage and family therapist. This is the license that I personally am a little bit more proud of. Not that I'm not proud of my LPC for sure, but this one took me a little bit more work, and it was a little bit more difficult to get. So an LMFT requires more education around systems and families. So we have a systems lens, if you will. So the way I explain it is that the way I see a person and whatever is afflicting them is how is this interacting with the other systems in their life, whether it's internal systems, home environment, work, school environment, what have you. Most, if not all, states require that in order for someone to attain their licensed marriage family therapy licensure, they have to have a certain amount of hours in contact with either couples or families. In the state of Colorado, if I remember correctly, I'm going to have to double check what I was required to do in order for my license. It was 1,500 contact hours, meaning how many hours I actually came in contact with clients, 1,000 of which had to be with couples and families, and this had to be over the course of a minimum of 2 years. It took me a little bit longer than 2 years, and that's okay that it took me that long. Other states might have differing requirements. Give me 1 second, please. Okay. So that's the biggest difference there. Now, that's not to say that other licenses can't do couples counseling or family counseling. A license, an LMFT, is particularly focused on family therapy. A licensed clinical social worker has a social justice lens, if you will, looking at what the different social inequities exist that can impact a client. The thing about an LCSW is most times when people hear social worker, they automatically assume that it's a person employed with child protection or adult protection. And the thing is that person with a licensed clinical social worker degree, and really any of the lower degrees from that, is able to work as a therapist and not just working for the county or the state under child protection or adult protection. They also have their same sort of degree requirements and licensure requirements, a certain amount of hours with the client, certain amount of hours doing X, Y, and Z. Like, they all have their own degree requirements there. And then an LPC, or licensed professional counselor, they're a little bit more open in that their lens can vary from person to person. They're also maybe referred to as an LMHC, or a licensed mental health counselor in some states. So just because if you Google LPC, or licensed professional counselor, let's say Illinois or Florida or Iowa, that doesn't, and it doesn't pull up, that doesn't mean that the licensure does not exist. It just may be under a different name. Finally, in this last page that I have an LIC, or licensed addiction counselor, the CAC certification. So these are your certified addiction counselors, and then other certifications, and then your candidates. So a licensed addiction counselor has basically meets all the training and our requirements of the previous CAC levels, and also has a master's degree. Okay. Now, at least in the state of Colorado, again, double check with your particular state to see if the requirements are different, because they may very well be. CAC 1, 2, and 3 are the 3 distinct levels of certified addiction counseling, with 1 being the lowest and then 3 being the highest, and all require a certain amount of training and hours in contact with clients in order to get that particular certification. Finally, your candidates. So these are your MFTCs, LPCCs, PsyCs, whatnot. Now, I don't know that every state necessarily has the candidate designation. Again, double check with your state's licensing and regulatory boards. In the state of Colorado, it indicates a direction of going towards a particular licensure. So an LPCC is a candidate working towards their licensed professional counselor license. Same with MFTC. They're working towards their licensed marriage family therapy license. A PsyC is working towards their psychologist license, so forth. And then other certifications. I decided to include this just because it might come up if you are perusing and looking for a new counselor, and you're like, oh, I don't know what NCC stands for. What is this an EMDR thing, or what is this RPT or whatever? That's just additional training and specialization that particular therapist has. And if they have them as part of their signature, as part of their license, it means that they have received that certification in that particular protocol. I'll give the example now. EMDR is a particular trauma protocol that I'll go in at length in a different video. It stands for anti-movement desensitization reprocessing. But if you see it as part of a signature, like if I were to have that certification and I would put, LPC, LMFT, EMDR, that means that I have become certified in that EMDR protocol. Some other certifications that you might see is RPT, which stands for Registered Play Therapist. This is a person that has gained additional training and education around play therapy, and to the point where they are able to say that they are a registered play therapist, and they have their own boards and whatnot that they have to register with. Our RT stands for Rapid Resolution Therapy. It's another trauma protocol, so on and so forth. I mean, I'm sure there are certifications that I'm missing, just because sometimes it seems like there's so many, and the field is always changing, and there's new certifications that are able to be obtained. But essentially, if it's not one of the main LMFT, LCSW, one of those main things, it's a specialized certification that the therapist has obtained. All right, so I know I just threw a lot of information at you, so let's just take a breath. Does this all matter? What does it mean? Well, for you as a layperson, it may not mean much. Now, something I forgot to mention is that licensed clinical social worker is able to be paneled with Medicare and TRICARE. I have heard that once upon a time, licensed professional counselors were able to be paneled with Medicare. I don't believe that's the case now. Again, I will double check before I post this video on tonight. But for right now, my understanding is that only psychologists and licensed clinical social workers are able to be paneled with both Medicare and TRICARE. TRICARE being the insurance that many government employees use, or such as the VA, military. So if you're planning on using that insurance, know that your options in terms of licensure are going to be limited to one of those two licenses. It depends on how you value like education, what lens makes most sense to you. What ultimately it comes down to is, regardless of the licensure, of the initials behind my name or Sherry's name, who's a therapist who works for me, or any other therapist that you may encounter, it's really your relationship with said therapist that matters most. That's what has been shown to really help affect change, is the relationship with a therapist. Now, in terms of language, it wouldn't be appropriate to call me a master's level licensed professional counselor and licensed marriage family therapist a doctor, because I have not earned that credential. And I do correct people from time to time on it, just because like that's not my credential. It wouldn't necessarily be appropriate, and usually I end up being called Miss Emily, which is totally fine with me. If any questions arise around licenses, please let me know. I'll probably be making reference to this video from time to time as we explore other topics such as medications, you know, how to ask for medication, around different certifications, you know, why is this person paneled on my insurance, why is this person not paneled on my insurance, and what some of the latest research says on different modes of therapy. In all case, I hope you all are taking care, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you so much for joining me today.